Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Let's Spill the Tea on Being Anxiety Free. I want to talk about the stance that I take with anxiety, the stance how I look at anxiety in the more non-traditional ways. And this doesn't come from this not knowing. This doesn't come from lack of experience. For a very long time, I experienced anxiety at such a heightened level that I was really sick. And I did the honest thing. I was a teacher. I am a mom. I was a mom at the time. I had friends and wife and parents. I had all these things. I couldn't be this anxious wreck that I didn't even know that I was, and yet it was slamming me in my face. I need to do something different. I need to do life differently. So I got serious about anxiety, and I was like, right, I need to beat this. Right, this is another thing on my list of stuff that I'm doing wrong, and I need to I need to put all my energy into it. And then that way I'm going to figure out how to make it right, how to fix it. And that's how I went into it. And then all the doctors told me how serious I needed to get about anxiety, how serious I needed to get about my health, how serious I needed to get about my mindset. And then I went to talk therapy, and we all took it very seriously. It was a serious thing. And I tried to speak to the team at school, and everybody took it really seriously. Oh, we thought you were fine. You've got this act going on. Oh God, we need to take this really seriously. And that's all I did at the start of this journey. I got really serious about anxiety, and guess what happened? It got worse. So not only I've been blindly leading this life of the most heightened anxious state that you could imagine, but blindly because it was all I'd known. That's the scariest thing about it, isn't it? When it's our brain neurology and it's just the patterns we've existed in for so long, we don't even know it's problematic. So then it screamed at me in the face that this is very problematic. I was like, oh, I need to get serious about anxiety. This is clearly a problem. Then I started to learn about anxiety. I started to learn about my brain. I started to learn about the problems I was experiencing and how almost all of them could be traced back to me. I was like, well, this is a lot. This is all very serious. This is all very heavy. And so we all just got more and more serious. And it was like I dug in deep. And the more I learned about it, the more I was like, oh my God. And it just became this big deal and this big thing. And everybody was so freaking serious. And I could pinpoint to you why I had the problems. I could root them back to my traumas. I could root them back to the things that had happened to me. I was an expert. I could take you through the details of everything that I had experienced. But it didn't help. I was no better off. I was just very sure of why I was in the anxious mess that I was in. It's like, okay, great. Now I am very aware. I have this, I know why. Now what? So I explored the East. I am best friends with the monks. I explored the East. I explored journaling. I explored meditation. I explored all that kind of side of stuff. A lot of that is faith and hope and wishing, and I didn't identify with that. I was see it, believe it, very scientific mind. So I started to explore quantum physics and biology and physics within the body and how all of this worked. And that started to give me answers. That started to give me this kind of headway into something that made no sense. It was something I could be serious about. That's that overthinking part of my brain that just loves to get hold of something. Well, I could give it something to get hold of. How the body worked. How actually the brain is just this supercomputer. And it's desperate to just have a chill. It uses 20% of all of our energy. It's desperate for a chill. So it's always looking to go into neutral. When you're in a car and you just want to coast, and you put it in neutral and you're just coasting along, nothing's coming up, it's just chill, it's just easy. The brain's always looking to do that. And the way it can do that most easily and most readily is by looking for evidence that already makes sense to it. And when it's looking for evidence outside in the world and it makes sense to it, it creates this story, this belief, this value, and then we lock it into our brain. And it's almost like we go, right, I've taken care of that. That belief system is just neurology. when I was learning this, I was like, this is cool. Like, I can get into this. So my anxious state, hold on a minute. My anxious state, my anxious thinking, my brain working in the way it does, all it is something happens. I have a thought, something generally happens out there, and it sparks a thought, which is just a neuron inside my brain, which sparks another thought, and they usually like link together, that I make a judgment on. It then feeds into my body, and it tells different glands inside my body to secrete a chemical which makes me feel a certain way, which I then make a judgment on, or however that makes me feel, which was shitty and anxious most of the time. Then I'm going to create thoughts to look for evidence out there that feed into this mantra. I was stuck in this cycle. So my thoughts, my anxious thoughts, were creating anxiety inside my body, high levels of cortisol and adrenaline, and the things that just make us feel like we've got to be in fight and flight all of the time. It was literally communicating, saying, let's do that. And then my body was in this fight and flight state, and it was signaling to my brain then, like, the thoughts to match. Okay, well, this is clearly going on. Let's find the evidence for it, because we want to chill. We want to go into neutral, and we just want to coast our way home. That's where I was. I was like, cool. So, if all that's happening is my brain is thinking things which are telling chemicals to secrete certain things inside my body that don't feel that great, what if I kind of interrupt that sequence? What if it really is as easy as that? And when I tried to have conversations about it, it's like, no, we need to talk about things. And don't get me wrong, like, I had a lot of skeletons in my closet that I was very keen on keeping there, because the thought of going towards that was terrifying. The thought of having awkward conversations with people in my life that I really needed to have awkward conversations with, that felt awful. But I didn't even need to do that at that point. I was just like, hang on, if I'm just dealing with chemistry, neurology and chemistry, I can interrupt that. Then I took it a bit further, because I was jamming with the monks, and you've heard me speak about the monks before. I would be looking around at them thinking, guys, you're liars. You can't be this chill. You can't be this chill. I once saw a Jean Lao, who is like my master. Somebody went at him, so angry, unnecessarily so, and I couldn't quite believe what was happening. So I followed, because I have to get involved, because that's my gift. I followed them down the corridor. The angry person went one way, and a Jean Lao went into his office. And I followed a Jean Lao. I was like, are you okay? And he didn't know what I was speaking about. He's like, what? I said, the man, he was so mad with you. Like, what? And he went, oh, he's mad with himself. He's not mad with me. Like, who are you? Like, what? I'm in a heap on the floor. So I was experiencing life around these people that were doing things that was blowing my mind, that was so far removed from what regular humans, especially the regular humans that I was networking with, were doing. I was intrigued by it all. So I had this very scientific knowledge base, like A plus B equals C. And I like that. I have a conscious brain that loves to overthink and loves to land on things, like, hello, being a human. But then I also was having this direct experience of these beings, and it wasn't just one. It was a lot of them, not all of them. It was a lot of them. Too many to be a coincidence. I'm like, okay, these two things combined, if I'm exploring the neurology of the mind, and that's like the tangible stuff, and then I'm looking at these monks who are rocking life and things just aren't bothering them. But I don't want to be a monk. I don't want to be a nun. I have a life. I like my life. How do I bring those two things together? My brain loves an overthink. It loves a challenge. And so that's why I had experienced the heights of anxiety that I had, and nothing kind of worked. I was exploring this whole world because I brought this medley all together. In quantum physics, so much, and I say every time I think about it, I need to remember what the word is, but there's a word in science when things just don't make sense. When they're just like, well, we'll just press pause that. The double split experiment, literally since the the 1800s, they've been trying to do this investigation to try and figure out how light waveform collapses when it's consciously observed. Nobody can do it. We're in the 21st century and they keep doing the same tests to try and figure out how conscious awareness allows matter to collapse, waveform to collapse into matter. It makes no sense. So I started to get curious around quantum physics and how so much of religion and quantum physics kind of match up. I went to see Brian Cox, who's an amazing scientist in the UK. We went to like his stadium tour. It was so cool, learning about the universe, learning about the start of time. And I was sitting with scientists, and so many of them were like, oh, that's a bit too far, like I don't understand that. And I'm like, oh my God, how can I understand this? Why? Because I've directly experienced this. How? Through coming out of my anxious brain. My brain was so anxious for so much of my life that by choosing not to listen to it, because that is accessible, and that's what I'm going to be talking through in this podcast about how we get to do that, how we get to awaken our inner power. When we learn to do that, in spite of having a brain that is literally on edge about everything, like gasping through life, when we can awaken this inner power inside us, in spite of that brain, oh my God, we perceive this world on a different level. And that's what I realized I'd done. And it wasn't through deep, profound meditations in silent retreats, because that's what I thought I had to do. Like I learned Vipassana meditation from Goenka, who advises you to go on like 10-day silent retreats. I can't be quiet for 10 days. That's not happening. I have experienced these insights it's so freaking easy. It hurts my head. I don't know why we're not taught this. This is why I'm trying to do this work in the world. We get to experience this by recognizing that there isn't absolute, and this is the human brain is like, there's gotta be, I want absolute answers. There are not absolute answers to things. Science keeps trying to catch up with the way this universe is created. We know less than 5% of it. Dramatic pause. Less than 5%. We're trying to understand everything, and only then we're willing to move through it. But what if we were never here to fully understand it, or we were here to experience life? We were here to, experience this human experience for everything that it is, whilst being able to hold the nuances of it all, but ultimately being able to understand that our brain is always going to attempt to understand this human experience, so it can put a stamp on it, so it can say, well, that makes sense, so that it can edge itself into neutral, so that it can just roll down the hill and save 20% of energy, because that's what it's always looking to do. We can know that about our brain and be like, yes, brain, I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to take me down those familiar paths. You're trying to nudge yourself into neutral so we can just roll through life. That's not helping me, babes. I can see what you're trying to do. Actually, that's just making me feel like shit, because that's keeping me locked in this anxious loop that I have known for too long, and I don't want it to be that anymore. Whilst playing with this bizarre idea that there's always more at whatever level we are expanding into, because that's what we're here to do as humans. We're here to expand. We're made of stardust, literally supernova from millions of years ago. We're made of the same stuff that is ever expanding. You can't get to the end of the universe. So as we're expanding into this unexplored notion, and for there's more than this, at whatever level, and it's not about levels, like that sounds like it's some kind of hierarchy. It's not. It's just a level of perception, a paradigm of perception that your brain, that my brain can compute. Okay, I can compute this on this level. And it goes from being this really insular, like I just need a stamp on everything so I can close it off, so I can move it, shift my gear into my 20% and coast through life, to being like, oh, well, this doesn't make as much sense as I initially thought it did. Oh, how much more is there? If I can open my brain up to not be battling itself 24/7, being anxious all of the time, if I can awaken this inner power around that, then I can open my perception a bit wider. Ooh, there's more. Oh, like I don't know where it ends. And every time I'm like, this is going to be the end. There can't be more than this. This is friggin' awesome. I could not be more filled with joy and love and surrender. the power of surrender. I didn't know that I could let go of things. I had to control everything. And just when you think like this, it can't get more, it does. You lean back into a new level. The way I have come to explain this in my own brain, because it's a visual brain, it loves to overthink, it loves to latch onto things. So I've given it all the good stuff to latch onto, not anxiety anymore. So we work on 3 levels. We have the conscious mind that sits here. It's everything that we know to be true. All of our beliefs, all of our stories, all of our values, all of the things that we generally have a stamp around. I start, like, whenever there's a new belief or story, I always start with this notion. If I can think it, it's in my conscious mind, and it's possibly not true, probably not true. So we have the conscious mind, but then we have this deeper level. We have this deeper level of the unconscious. And I say that inside the unconscious, there's an emotional safe house. It's not safe. It's just a space that we have that's become so familiar to us. We define it as safe because the brain can put a cap on it and say, well, that's known. And you've survived up until now in this known. So let's just pop a stamp on it and say that your life's good and that's what it's going to be. If we want to change our life, this bit is imperative. Talk therapy deals up here. Like, let's talk through it. Let's go back into the trauma. Let's like talk about other stuff. And then the brain's like, yeah, Bob and Francis and Toad, there they are. They're all like, yeah, let's think about all that trauma a bit more. It's like, no, what actually needs to happen is in the unconscious, those stories. And you can't think your way into that space. And again, throughout this podcast, we're going to be looking at different ways we can approach thinking inside this emotional safe house. I'm going to give you so many tools that I have used to be able to unlock that door and that emotional safe house and just like peek out of it. Be like, okay, this doesn't feel safe. And yet there's something inside me that tells me that more lives outside of it, because I want more than this. What's in this emotional safe house, what I'm inside here that has got me functioning to this point, I want more than this. And so I have to go outside. I have to go outside the parameters of this safe house because it's not safe. It's just familiar. My brain is confused familiar with safe. Then there is the subconscious. This is the space where all religion rocks out. Like, I've studied so many different religions and it's all the same thing. I've studied so many different energies like Reiki and Kundalini and all of the stuff. It's all the same thing. It's just different ways of accessing this I call it a universal energy space because my brain can make sense of that. My brain likes science. My brain likes, like, give me something tangible. When we look at it as a universal energy space, when I talked about the double slit test, where none of science understands how light particles can, under conscious observation, just collapse into matter, we are existing. What I always love looking at trees, like the space between the branches. I'm always looking at them like, what's in that space? It's that we're surrounded, and we also are made up of the same thing, this universal energy space. That's the subconscious. When we can make a link from that subconscious space, because we were born knowing, this is the annoying thing about it. We know. We were born knowing, and then our parents who friggin' love us. I have the best parents. You have the best parents. And yet, I think we can all agree that we can love our parents so much and be so grateful and all of the good stuff for them. And yet, some things didn't quite meet the requirements that would have been most helpful for us. I think we can all, if we're being truly honest, that doesn't take away from our love for our parents. They're the best. And yet, we were born knowing, but they thought that there was a special way to be a human. Isn't it weird how we all go through life like there's a special code, there's a special way of being human, and if you get these ticks, if you do these things, then you're past the human experience. And we all try to do these things, we're like, well, it ain't working. Think, we're adults now, and I've got children, they're 8. I haven't got a our parents didn't know what was going on. They still knew less than 5% of the universe. Like, none of this made sense. But how much did our parents act like they knew definitively what was best for us and what was good for us? And they told us very firmly what it was. Well, that just smushed us down into thinking we didn't know what we were here to do. And we absolutely do. And our answers to knowing what we're here to do. We've got to know who we're here to be, and we know that absolutely. It just got a bit lost, and as we look at those 3 layers, it's stuck in the conscious mind. The great thing is, it is absolute in the subconscious. The answers are all there. They're just being blocked. It's like a big barricade. That emotional safe house is barricading the subconscious from connecting with the conscious. What we're able to do, and I'm going to show you through this series of this podcast, of how we get to start to move, and we don't have to go searching around in our dirty knicker drawer. Like, it is so far away from talk therapy. It's ridiculous. We get to move through the space of the unconscious so we can then connect into that subconscious space, so we can get, I call it a rainbow road, and that's why my narwhal with her rainbow, there's 7 fundamental elements that I'm going to take you through. And when we're able to connect those 7 elements, it's like we create this rainbow bridge, this direct line, a highway, a road that takes us from the subconscious, and it connects up to our conscious mind, and it's in moments of like, oh my God, this is who I am. And literally, these are my best messages I get from anyone. It's like, I know who the fuck I am. I know who I am. It's like, yes, you've always known. I've always known. It just got lost along the way. And our survival techniques that meant that we were able to function our way into being this old as we are now, they got in the way of us realizing our powers and our strength and our reason for being. So as we do the work to move those things out of the way and release them, be like, God, don't need you, don't want you, thank you, because you were some kind of protection somewhere along the way. But no, we connect into the subconscious, which brings ideas into the conscious. And once they're there, we're able to then be like, oh, this is how my work has been birthed. And this is how I teach the women and men. I have some amazing male clients, but mainly women, how to be able to birth their work. You know divinely you're here for something more. You know it. You just, so often we're like, but what? And how the freaking hell do I access it? This. And it's not, let me sit down, let me take a class, let me take another course, let me get there. It's not those things. It's, let me figure out who I am and connect to that universal energy space that makes no sense, but you connect to it. And maybe you're watching this and you're like, oh my God, I've connected to it. Like, I just need to put some dots together. Yes. Once you connect to that once, you're like, none of this makes sense. This is the best experience I could ever ask for. Not like me getting up in the mornings looking at my 2 cats when I had horrible anxiety, being like, I wish I was a cat. I don't want to do this human experience. And now I'm like, let's frigging go. When you experience that space, who you are becomes clear. What you're here to do becomes clear. And the methodology behind how to do it becomes clear. The clarity that you gain from that connection is everything. And my book, where is it? Here. Well, there's some there, but this is my book is the most beautiful example of this, because this was my guide at the beginning of this. Like, how do I put these 7 steps and get that rainbow road from the subconscious into my conscious, just out of habit, just like frigging breathing. That's what I knew I wanted to do. So this was birth. The formula was birth, and it's a sensory experience. And again, I'm going to take you through this. I'm going to take you through this through the podcast. So don't be like, this is why we're here together. This sensory experience, so that then I could create space in that unconscious where I knew my blocks were, I knew my limits were, I knew I was getting in my own way, like I knew what was wrong, but I couldn't do anything about it. I was able to move into those spaces. So my formula was first. It came through as this like, what? I remember the moment in the woods. There's a video of me where I was just at the kind of end when I was composing myself, of just being on my knees, sobbing, being like, what is this? What even is this? It was a divine idea of a sensory experience to get into that unconscious where all the conscious nonsense has been stored for too long. This is how you get into it. So that was the first taste of kind of this connection being really strong. And I was like, oh my God, where the hell did it was like that energy? Where the hell did that come from? But I went with it. And that's what I've been teaching for so long. And then I got this idea of like, it needs to be in a book now. I was like, why? Why would I charge £30 for a book where all of my work, I'm not a teacher anymore in schools, like this is my full-time career, and the main thing people want to learn from me is the fine formula. Why would I put it into a book? And I was like, well, I know I'm meant to trust this. I've experienced it. I know how these messages come through, and that's what I'm meant to be doing. So I did. And on the release of this, my next work, Awakening in the Power, which is powerful on a different level, came into fruition, came into being. Like, that's how it gets to work. When we're connected to the subconscious, we move through the unconscious, being like, let's just skip that bit where you're going to tell yourself no, where you're going to tell yourself it's too scary, where you're going to tell yourself it's too expensive, where you're going to tell yourself you haven't got the time, where I'm going to get in my own way. Let's just skip that and go to the bit where it's like, let's go. Let's do that. When we're connected here, we know who we're here to be. We know what we're here to do. And that work, when we're connected to the subconscious, it gets to flow through. Sometimes it makes no sense in that moment, but you trust because you've built that connection so profoundly. You're like, I don't get it, but I know this is the way I'm meant to step. It is the way I'm meant to lead. And you are able to then lead yourself into those spaces that make no sense until after. And then you look back and you're like, holy moly, that's why that moment in the wood and those senses and that experience that was so profound, that led to the formula. And then the formula and that moment of knowing that, well, this needs to be a book and that makes no sense. Why would I do that? Oh, because then that gets to be the guide to this. That's how it builds. That's how it grows. That's what it's meant to be. We're not meant to understand it all with our conscious brain. And that's the world that we live in teaches us that. And what we get to do is realize that that ain't the case. The easiest way that you and I get to be free from anxiety in particular, anxiety is, and this is going to be a separate podcast episode, anxiety is, at the levels of anxiety that we experience is a direct correlation of how disconnected we are to our actual self, the actual true self that's here to spread our work into the world. My anxiety was so extreme because I was so disconnected from who I'm here to be. When we're able to do that, everything gets clear. I've been asked by so many business coaches, how are you doing what you're doing? And my answer always remains the same. It's because I understand the importance of figuring out who I am, and that is already predetermined. It's pre-written into my DNA. I just need to make space. I need to make space for it to come through. So I challenge you, the next time that you feel yourself in your anxious brain, overthinking, over planning, trying to determine what it all means, choose that rainbow road, choose that connection to that universal energy space, that subconscious space, because our answers to what you're here to, who you are, what you're here to do, they lie in there and they get to flow through when we dedicate ourselves to that. Thank you so much for being here on my third episode of my new podcast. If you would like this in kind of order and to keep up to speed on the podcast as we're going along, then you can get that. The link is in my stories. I would love to see you there. Thank you for being here. Remember, our job over everything else is to be free. Then we learn what we're here to do. Then our work flows through. Then the impact and the income that we are here to receive is a match. You don't have to do the work then. It's a match. You are a match. Thank you for being here.